Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for tuning in. My name is Rachel Harkness. I'm the programming manager at the Portland Public Library. And today we are delighted to be hosting Kerri Arsenault and Kate Christensen at the Literary Lunch. They are here to discuss Kerri's new book, Milltown, Reckoning with What Remains. Kerri Arsenault is a book critic and book editor at Orion Magazine and a contributing editor at the Literary Hub. She is also a mentor for PEN America's Prison and Justice Writing Program, and her work has appeared in Freeman's, the Boston Globe, Down East, the Paris Review Daily, the New York Review of Books, and Airmail. Milltown, Reckoning with What Remains is her first book. And Kate Christensen will be interviewing Kerri. She's the author of 7 novels, including The Great Man, which won the 2008 PEN Faulkner Award for fiction, and The Last Cruise, published in 2019. She's also published 2 food-centric memoirs, Blue Plate Special and How to Cook a Moose, which won the 2016 Maine Literary Award for Memoir. And thank you so much to Kerri and Kate for being here. I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Rachel.
Thank you, Rachel. It's so nice to be here at the library. I've been really excited to talk to you, Kerri, because last time I talked to you, we've never met in real life.
Right.
We've only met on Zoom and an email. And last time was your launch event at Print 2 weeks ago. But we got to talk about so much during that. We got to talk about why and how you wrote your book. And we got to talk about the themes in your book. And I got to extol its literary greatness, which I would be happy to do anytime. All of you must read this book. It's fantastic. But we didn't get to talk about so much else. And I just sort of thought, oh, good, we have this other opportunity to have a conversation. And since we've been emailing along the way, so I just want to sort of pick up where we've been, you know, sort of sharing our passion, which is for food.
Yes.
And food writing and Maine. And one of the things I'm really excited to talk about also is your Acadian heritage, because I, as a new Mainer, when I had been here for 2 minutes, I had the audacity and arrogance to write a book about food in Maine. And I was in this sort of honeymoon rosy glow when I wrote How to Cook a Moose, because I'd been a New Yorker for 20 years and I moved up here and was gobsmacked by Maine, just by what I found here, a sense of sort of, first of all, belonging that I've never felt anywhere else. And, you know, that too is audacity because I'm from Maine. But also a passion for the food here. And I've always felt this twin kind of fascination with lumber camps and the food that they cooked in lumber camps, which is famously prodigious and lavish and high calorie. Also,
understatement, yeah.
And also with the Acadians. And you write a lot in Milltown about being an Acadian and what that means, and sort of tracing your roots. In fact, that's how the book began, was you asking sort of what does it mean that I'm an Acadian? What does it mean that I'm a Franco-American? And what actually is that in terms of an identity and a culture? And so the genesis of this book was rooted in Acadia, right?
It really was. It was literally when I think, did I say this to you? But when I found my grandfather's obituary. Did I tell you about that? It was like this. Yeah. So I should tell everybody else. That's already okay. Very briefly, I found my grandfather's obituary, who was born in Prince Edward Island, who was Acadian, and it told me things I didn't know about him, and I started to explore some of those things, basically.
And out of it came a book.
Out of it came this book.
a book.
I ended up somewhere totally else, but it's okay.
Well, it's about growing up in Rumford, and which is a mill town, which is why it's called Milltown, I imagine. But it's interesting because it's so loving and full of just incredible tenderness and understanding and compassion for the workers in this mill, many of whom are your relatives, all of whom are sort of the people you grew up amongst, and also an expose of what the mill is doing to these people. And it's a sort of twining of, ecological and social, and which is really interesting, and family deeply family. But I was leading up to a request, which is that there's a part in your book, and this is my lumber camp passion. But you write about your great grandfather, who, to my absolute excitement, was a cookie, which is what they called the cooks in the lumber camps.
I should say I had no idea that Kate was obsessed with cookies. I knew she liked cooking, and cookies is spelled not like Cookie Monster. It's spelled with 2 E's at the end, a cookie can. But I did in fact write about this, and I am more than happy to read this to you. And I think everybody here, it is lunch. I hope you're eating. And if you're not, you're going to be hungry after this, perhaps, or full. I'm not sure which. So just so you know, this is, here, let me get this. I have this big microphone. Maybe I'll put it over here. This is my great grandfather on my mother's side. I think I can just start here. It's called Blind Spots section. In a sepia photograph, my maternal great-grandfather, Pierre Godin, sits on a giant stump in front of a logging camp, arms crossed, a thicket of wavy hair, a long-handled axe buried in the woodpile next to him. Pierre worked as a logging camp cook, a cookee, in northern Maine when he was young, where he fed lumberjacks who toiled in the woods 10 hours a day, severing tree trunks with toothy two-man crosscut saws. The drafty cabins where Pierre worked were fueled by wood stoves that warmed their bodies and dried their socks. In more primitive camps, a hollowed-out log served as a sink or bench, and pine needles a crunchy, fragrant mattress. Men slept in splintery-hewn bunks stacked around a stink pole, where they strung their half-washed clothes like steamy, sour ornaments. In wintertime, they'd harness down trees to oxen and slide them across packed snow to ease the wood's weight. By spring, mud slowed the movement of the harvests, but lakes and rivers swelled into liquid highways, which lumberjacks used to raft the flotilla of trees toward Maine's coastal ports to be sold and sent throughout New England and the world. Every day, Pierre rose at 3 a.m. and made Paul Bunyan-sized breakfasts for his hungry mob: biscuits, codfish, donuts, partridge, tea, potatoes, rice, molasses, coffee, macaroni, pickled beef, cookies, bacon, cakes, and the great trinity of beans, pork, and bread. Logging camps without good cooks shuddered, and inferior cooks were ousted by grumbling crowds of muscle-fisted men. A cookie's task boosted not only productivity, but morale. As soon as the men bolted down their breakfast, Pierre assembled an equally massive sack lunch. After the lumberjacks left for the day's work, he began preparing their next meal to keep up with their 9,000 calorie a day intake. In an endless circle of cooking and cleaning, his job was as vital to the paper industry as the pines the lumberjacks felled.
Thank you. I could listen to that all day.
I wish the list, I wanted the list to be even longer. I think it is. I sent you an article about it, and there's so much food they ate. I wish I could eat that much.
And 5 times a day or something they ate.
It's like a dream come true. If I could eat 5 times a day, like just 9,000 calories. I guess if I were cutting trees down, I probably would. But
yeah, I feel like it would be worth doing all that physical labor just to be able to eat that much.
Right.
You know? So you're a cook.
I am a cook. I love to cook. And I think I'm a pretty good cook. I like to feed. I like my great grandfather, like to feed crowds of hungry people. And it wasn't until writing this book that I even made that connection of, I didn't know him. He was more mythology than person. And I did remember my great grandmother. I was 3, I think, when she died. But he lived with my grandmother and my mother. They all 3 generations in the same house. And it was like that whole idea of like eating and feeding people. It was more like feeding people than eating, you know what I mean? And that, my grandmother did that and my mother did that. I mean, our house after school was the place kids came to just eat. And my mother loved it. And my father too, to a degree when he was not working. But I think I never realized that I got that from them until writing this book. just that idea. We don't cook the same, I don't think. Maybe there's a few things, like my father's shortbread recipe, my mother's spaghetti and meatballs, weirdly not French Canadian, neither of them. but yeah, just feeding people and just having that companionship and around the table, and lots of yelling often, like not fighting, but just a loud group of boisterous women mostly. I did an event with Ben Fountain the other day, and he was reading passages of my book. He's like, Kerri, there's a lot of like really strong, loud women in your family. He got that from the book. I mean, there was no shouting, but anyway, yeah, we sit around the table and just like eating.
So what are some of the other things that you ate when you were little that like, is there an Acadian, like, I know all about the Cajuns in Louisiana, and they made, all this food really famous, and the whole Cajun cuisine is a thing. And there's not a corresponding Acadian, I feel like the Acadians are more mysterious than the Cajuns.
Well, more mysterious, and because nobody really knows their story a little bit,
Until you wrote it. Until there's very little.
There is very little. And the food itself is very, from what I know, so I can tell you what we grew up eating. I mean, there's a French name for it, tortilla, but we called it meat pie. Like, the French language sort of got slivered off over the years, and it's just like meat pie.
The French language got ripped away from you. You were forbidden to speak it for.
Yeah, my grandmother was. She was born 1918, and that was the year that Maine forbade it in the schools.
It was illegal.
Yeah, it was illegal. And then, over the years, of course, she stopped speaking it. My great grandmother had died, so then my mother, didn't really speak it. We just learned it in school. It was really the language you learned, and we'd go once a year to Quebec or Montreal with a school trip and try to use our French. But anyway, the tortilla was meat pie, and it's funny. Meat pie is like, it's kind of like the Acadian spaghetti and meatballs. Like, everybody has their way of doing it. You know what I mean? My mother's way, and I would tell you the basic recipe is basically my way, except for, so it's ground beef with instant potatoes, which I know, I don't use them. That Bell seasoning, is that what it is? Yeah, that Bell seasoning, which had, I don't know, what does it have in it? Like marjoram and mace, all kinds of weird things that like you don't often use in some recipes. I don't know what's in there. But we just get the Bells and onions. No, did she even use? Yeah, she did use onions, but I hated them as a kid, so she'd have to mash them up really small. I didn't know they were in there. Like, if I found anything that like bit of an onion, I would like spit it out on my plate. So, and so you cook the onions, put in the beef, then put in the mashed potato, the instant potatoes, because then it would give it this thickness, and then the seasoning, salt and pepper, put it in a pie crust, put the top of the pie crust, bake it. And it was really a thing we often only had on Christmas morning was the thing. And my sister, if she's here at all, I don't know if she is, still does that. And I think I just pulled one. They freeze really well. And I just pulled one out a few weeks ago. My husband, I had made one, and I was like, oh my God, there's a meat pie. And it's so great. You just pull it. So like one slice is like eating a softball, it's like so filling. But we also, I have to say, there's like a lot of bad things we did to it too, which was, I really like it with ketchup.
Yum. Why is that bad?
I don't know. Is it? I mean, I'll eat ketchup on anything. I would eat this coffee mug.
I would eat cardboard with ketchup on it. I put it on everything, including eggs, and you can shoot me for that.
Yes.
But it's so good on eggs.
So good on eggs.
So what is your meat pie recipe? How is it different from your mother's?
So, I use real potatoes, but it's kind of a drag. And so my husband, in making some, he bought some instant potatoes, but now you can sort of get like organic, non-GMO. We think we're doing better, but we have some up in the cupboard, and it helps because it's just instant. It adds like that instant kind of density to the mass. Yeah. But I have used real potatoes, and I like the little bits of potatoes in there. It's like eating a little bit of home fry in there with the onion. And
So do you like onions now?
I don't think there's anything I make that doesn't have onions in it.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah.
Although over the years, I have become more and more susceptible to the tears of them. Like I was just touching an onion, I'll be like, it's what I have a husband for.
You know, I wear contact lenses, and I find that I don't cry when I chop onions.
Huh.
And I forgot that people cry when they chop onions because it's been so many years.
Well, wow. Maybe I should get contacts.
Get contacts. Also, my husband says that if you get something wet on your face, I can't remember. I'll ask him. I'll email.
It sounds like something my great grandmother would say. She'd be like, "You got a bloody nose." She'd say, "Stick a tissue up over your upper lip," and I'm like,
"Tilt your head back," and it'll.
Yeah. She used to make us stick tissues up here, and I'm like, "Why did we get so many bloody noses as kids, anyway?"
Probably because you lived in Rumford.
Oh, right.
But my sister got them all the time. I think some kids just get bloody noses. They're like the bloody nose kids. I've never had one in my life.
Yeah.
They freak me out. Like, why does your nose bleed? What causes them? But anyway, that's neither here nor there.
Well, kind of.
Question.
But the meat pie, yeah. I mean, I make them basically the same, and I try to make my own crust. But again, those what are those Pillsbury in the red box? Those things are pretty great. I mean, if you're in a hurry and you want to make a bunch of them, like my mother does at Christmas, she just lines them up and fills them, and she hands them out like Christmas cards.
Like, here's a meat pie.
Yeah. If you show up at her house, you'll get a meat pie.
Yeah.
You'd go home with one.
Give me your address.
I will. Let me see if she's on here.
I've never had a tortilla in all this years. Now I've lived here almost 10 years, and I still have yet to eat a tortilla. So basically, it's a shepherd's pie and a pie crust.
With no vegetables.
With no vegetables, except onion?
Just onion, but it's like they disappear. There's a different kind of meat pie, too. I can't remember what my grandmother called it. It was, she would fry the pork. It was like pork. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it wasn't anything. It wasn't like pork belly or anything. It was kind of just like pork roast and a little bit of onion. But she would make this little gravy, this light gravy, and then put that in a pie crust. And I never ate that till I was older because I didn't like big chunks of meat. It just freaked me out chewing them. But I mean, I eat everything now. But that was the other meat pie. I think she maybe put a little nutmeg in there too.
So was that Acadian, or was that just her?
No, that was Acadian too. What else did they make?
Okay, so what about ploys?
Oh, I make those now, and my mother kind of did too, but they're made with buckwheat generally, supposedly. Basically like a flat crate, and you can eat them with everything. We had them a couple times, but it wasn't a big deal. But now I love them. I love buckwheat, and I just got this.
I do too.
I just ordered like a 12-pound bag of buckwheat flour. So I'm gonna from the internets.
I know, but is it coming from like?
It's actually from France.
So you're going all the way to the mother country.
I was going to the mother country to get my buckwheat, yes. But I didn't know. It was one of those things, when you're shopping online and you think, oh, I'm just going to get a pound of flour. And it was like, came, and I was like, what the hell? It was like as big as a laser printer. I'll bring you some.
At Hannaford. And it's Bouchard Family Farms Acadian buckwheat flour.
Yeah.
Somebody told me that it's super refined and it's not at all sort of authentic buckwheat flour. I mean, I can't eat gluten, and so I'll
neither
use anything. You don't eat it either?
I don't eat it. That's what I'll bring you some. I have 12 pounds of it. I'll bring you half of it.
Please. Okay.
Yeah, it's not refined. That's why I kind of searched around to try to find some.
So in your research for your book, I feel like you learned a tremendous amount about being who the Acadians are, where they came from, why they're here, which is a whole other story. And I wonder if you want to talk a little bit about that, just in terms of your book and how relevant it is. In fact, how alive that history is in Rumford right now.
Yeah. I grew up in Rumford in Mexico, in case anybody just got here. And most of our town was either Franco-American or Acadian heritage. I mean, it felt like it. I mean, there were other people too, but there was a lot. And oddly enough, we didn't learn anything about our heritage, at all. We just learned the basic stuff you learn about, like the Mayflower and stuff like that, even though I found out later the Acadians were in North America way before, not way before, but years before the Mayflower and those people down in Jamestown. So part of, our ancestors, I was looking really at not just Rumford in Mexico, but as a bigger landscape, and how landscapes form us, how I think they're the foundation of our lives, whether we like it or not. And part of that landscape is coming from where we come from, not just the home, but DNA, our DNA creates us literally. So how can I not look at, what was in my past? It's the foundation upon which we build our lives. And not knowing that history, I thought, well, if I'm going to write this book and think about my family, I really have to go look at that, because I really knew nothing. I just knew little like glimpses. It was like opening a curtain and shutting it. It was like, that's as much as I knew. So basically I started digging into genealogy in 2001. And that same year, I went to Prince Edward Island. My father and I took a drive up by ourselves without my mother along. It was the first time we'd ever done a trip, first and last time we'd ever done a trip without her. She kind of runs the show, which is fine. But we wanted to find out where his father had come from, because his obituary, come to find out, was we couldn't find it on the map, this place where he was born. So we drove up there.
The obituary you were talking about earlier, though.
Yes, that's the obituary. It was missing information or wrong information. So my book started with like wrong information,
right.
Which basically the entire book is an investigation about wrong information, really.
Yeah.
It's just one of those pieces, And then I went to Prince Edward Island, and I didn't find all the answers I was looking for about that sort of foundation, that ancestral foundation. So my husband and I went to France in 2006 maybe, and followed the Loire Valley all the way down to the coast. So I just kept going back and back as far as I could go, to see where they came from, and like you said, why they came both to Canada and to Maine. And it was a lot of surprises along the way. One thing, I was just talking last night about it, and I guess it occurred to me while I was writing the book, but I have such a terrible memory, is that we followed the Loire River because a lot of my family had been working on those rivers in the riverine system, building, helping sort of move the water around where they wanted to go. I can't think of the word. I don't know what the word is. And then, so they did that, and then they came over to Prince Edward Island and did the same. They were taming the sea really with their hands, the tides, and that tide up there is brings in the most water. I can't even remember what it said in the book. Some astronomical amount of water the tide goes in and out. And then when they came to Rumford in Mexico, still they're on a river. It's like all these water things that were, I can't believe that's. And here I am writing about it. And here's my book cover for anybody who hasn't seen it. It's the actual river upon which my town is based. The Androscoggin River. So rivers were very important to my family, and it was the structure. It ended up being the structure of my book, because that river, just following it from the beginning, which is France, as far back as I can, to the end, which is like my town, just seemed to make sense. But I don't know. The other thing about, I think the biggest part of the history that people don't know about the Acadians is how they were ethnically cleansed from their land in 1755. Put on ships, and their houses burned, and people killed, and families split. They were just purposefully cruel, splitting the men and women and the elders and their children, and send them all up and down the East Coast to France, to hither and yon. They didn't go directly to Louisiana, which is something people think, but that's something I just sort of knew a little bit about, but not really how really terrible it was. And then, so much so that Acadia doesn't even exist anymore. There's Acadia National Park, and I'm not even sure if that's related. Is that related?
I don't know.
I don't even know. Why was it? It could be named because Acadia means like Eden, some kind of Eden. I don't know. I talk about it in the book, but there are all kinds of definitions for Acadia or Arcadia. So maybe that's why. But yeah, Acadia doesn't even exist. You can Google it. And it's like, well, it used to be this country. So there's the people without a country anymore, living in the country that was their country, really complicated to look at and think about where they came from. And my ancestors hid in the woods when all the ships came to take them away. They hid, at least the Arsenaults, there was both sides of my family have this history. So the Arsenault families hid and ended up repopulating parts of Prince Edward Island. And in the late 1800s and early 1900s, that's when they started to come to Maine to work in the industry. And that's the other thing that, there's this, Acadians were like instrumental. Acadians and Franco-Americans were instrumental in the Industrial Revolution along the East Coast, in the textile and the paper manufacturing factories. And it's a thing that not a lot of people know about. And I didn't know about it. If I didn't know, my family on both sides. And in fact, I traced my parents back to France, and they're related back there. They came from this small little town that I went to. It's like a town of 200 people. My parents are from there, So
yeah, that's also in the book, your description of going back to France with your husband.
Yeah.
Him saying to you, everyone in this town looks like you, and their gestures remind me of you.
Yeah, it was really weird. He was so freaked out by it, and I didn't notice. I was just like trying to speak French in my broken, bad high school French. I'm not even going to repeat anything I said. It's terrible. In the book, I read the book for the audio copy, and I was like, oh no, I have to pronounce French words. But he was watching us, and I felt like it's easy to see things you want to see, but at the same time, I think there are those connections. And there was Joan Vermette, who's from Portland or around the area. Sorry, she's not from Portland. Maybe she's on this call, but she was talking to me the other day about this. And I don't think I told you this, but she said, how did she say it? She says there's a historical reach, right? It's called historical reach. And I knew my great grandmother, who was born in like 1886. So I knew her a little bit, right? And she knew her great grandmother. So there's almost 200 years of historical reach that we had to our ancestors. So that's also like a long river of connection, if it, to overuse the metaphor, but it's true, so I don't want to co-opt that, say that I'm traumatized necessarily by my Acadian ancestors being ejected from their country. But if I go back through that historical reach, I can almost touch that fourth or fifth great grandmother, whatever she is. And she was part of that exodus.
Well, when you say the word trauma, it's true. I mean, it's been scientifically shown that trauma is passed down in DNA or in sort of biochemically.
Yeah, that there was that study. I should look at this more because it was years ago when I looked at that study. But that 1940 Dutch famine, they studied the genes of the people that were. They found genes were silenced in some of those people and in their descendants. 3 generations on, the same genes were silenced. Which the word "silenced" itself is like, oh my God, it's just. Yeah, that's crazy. So some people poo-poo that, but I mean, there's more and more things being done. It's very nascent research, but that trauma can be passed down makes a whole lot of sense to me.
A lot of sense. Like why wouldn't it be passed down?
Right. Why, if it's in our blood? I mean, you pass down cancer or you pass down brown hair. Why wouldn't trauma be passed down?
And another thing that I'm struck by that you write about in your book so profoundly and beautifully is the work ethic of the Acadians and how and the clannishness and how tightly knit your community was in Rumford. And one of the things that strikes me about the mysteriousness, essentially, of Franco-Americans and Acadians is that they are clannish and they do work really, really hard. And so it's not like a flashy culture like It's not, I feel like the Cajuns are flashy and sort of, you know, they established a really different sort of image or something. But the North in Maine are not about PR. You're not about like, you know, like your own mystique. But you genuinely have one, because I'm writing a novel now with.
Tell me about it.
And this is true. I mean, I'm so interested, and I'm also planning to write a novel set in a lumber camp, and I wrote a book about Maine food. So then you come along, and I'm like, hello.
Hello, we're going to be friends now.
I mean, really, I could talk to you all day, but I don't have all day. So I'll try to cut to the chase. So I feel like the culture of the Acadians was easily exploited once, and you're talking about how you were the backbone of the Industrial Revolution. You're also the backbone of the working class.
Right.
In Maine to this day, because of this work ethic and this tendency to stick together and not stick your heads up. You say in your book that it's a Catholic culture, and it's very centered on groups, on being one of a group. And so so it's, first of all, really interesting that you left and that you became a great writer, and then you came home and wrote about it. And so my question is really like 5-pronged. I'm curious to know, just to get back to you inheriting all these traits from your ancestors, your own work ethic, and also the lens that you turned on your own community and how that has felt. And I guess that's my question, or sort of open-ended.
Yeah, I'll just talk about it. Well, I definitely think, since we're talking about inherited things, and here it's like, I'm going to say it and I'm like, I don't want to brag. Like, I have that natural inclination. No, but I work really hard. I in fact, just wrote an essay about it that was in the New York Review of Books called My 86 Jobs, because I've had 86 jobs. That seemed like nothing to me until John Freeman said, you should write about that's weird. You know, I'm like, it is, you know, I don't know. So, and it wasn't because I was like flaky, or it was a bad 50 years, let's just say, in being from the working class, and which is kind of related to your question too. So I was like, well, you just kind of have to do what you have to do. And it didn't matter to me that I was like making pizza or waitressing or doing all those other stinky low wage jobs. It was just like, this is what I have to do. I wasn't like too good for those jobs, you know. I don't think I ever got it. Well, no, I would say I didn't get exploited, but I did a few times. Yeah. In certain ways. So inheriting that from my family, there's no way I could. I mean, I had, first of all, I would have been killed by my father. No, just kidding. I mean, working hard and keeping your nose clean and to the ground was just part of what I grew up as. And
right.
Sometimes friends would say that I'm competitive, and I am in sports, but I don't think I'm competitive in that way. I think it's more like I really want to work hard and I want to see the results of it. Does that make sense? Like it comes out sometimes as being competitive, but I want the result to be good. Like I want to work all day and see something. I want to make a meat pie and like have 20 of them sitting there or whatever, you know.
How did it feel I mean, you worked on this book for 10 years, speaking of working really hard.
I did.
And you researched it and worked, how many drafts did you write and sort of?
Hundreds. I have no idea. I mean, did people just write, like, did people say, oh, I wrote 3 drafts? I don't know. I wrote it, I just revised it every day. So like thousands of drafts. I don't, and that's funny you asked that, because I don't feel like I'm like, it's not finished yet. You know? Like I still have to work. And in fact, I just started that project. I think I mentioned it the other night, called that Cancer Yearbook, and it's on my website now. I just started collecting photographs and stories about people who have cancer or disease in my hometown that believe it might be connected to the paper mill's pollution. And I'm trying to just create a critical mass of that. So I always feel both responsible, like people started emailing me, and this is part of that heritage too. I just feel really responsible for it. Like I'm not just like, hey, thanks, or I'm not going to ignore people that have a story like that. It's meaningful to them, and I don't know, I can't ignore it, and I really want to make it somehow be meaningful to them too. That's part of it.
I think it's an amazing project. I'm so moved at the very idea of it and the impact it will have to people looking at these actual faces and the story and the name. It's so much more
Naming it, yeah, like
viscerally affecting, much more than statistics or sort of a compiled list. It's sort of
right, because that's what I would look through all these studies about cancer, and it was just so, and or they'd talk about studies about the fish or the food, and I was like, what about the humans? Are we studying the humans to look? There's not a lot of studies for the toxics I was looking at. There's not studies to say, oh, how much mercury's in your blood or dioxins, so that's why I did that. I thought, well, here's where we can look, and some of the stories are just freaking heartbreaking. I don't know. I mean, there's not that many on there right now. People are still gathering and people are asking permission, and it's kind of getting out there. I just started yesterday. So,
oh, wow.
Yeah, it's very new.
Wow.
How we got off on that. Yeah, just saying, feeling responsible, feeling like I need to keep working, feeling like the story's not about me, it's about them. It's all part of the Acadian sort of like deference to. I don't think it's a bad thing. I mean,
no, it's a wonderful thing. I mean, one of the most moving things in your book to me, I mean, I grew up sort of in a family that moved around every few years, and I never had a place. I never really belonged anywhere. And so I felt this, I mean, just when you describe all the kids, how many kids, like how many different softball teams were there?
I know. It's so, that makes me feel sad for you. Yeah, we had neighborhoods of, I mean, my best friend was the youngest of 13, and then my other good friend, she was the third of 15 kids. So just their families alone, we could have had like 4 softball teams, and my family was 5, and there was another set of girls we hung out with, there were 6. I mean, the neighborhood was filled with masses. I mean, there would be like an only child, once in a while, I'd be like, what's wrong with them? It was so strange.
I had the pleasure, after our conversation after your book launch, you invited me to the after party, which was amazing. It was, for just to fill you all in on what it was, I got invited into the Acadian sort of neighborhood chat room on Zoom, and I got to sit and listen for a couple of hours to reminiscences and people talking about your book, and it was astonishing. I felt like I was like in the inner circle of present day Rumford.
And it wasn't even me talking, it was all them. I was just sitting back and listening. And that's a little bit about what's sad about the pandemic right now, is that's what I wanted to do, is go through Maine and through these small towns and like really just listen to people's stories too. I really wanted to, but I have something in the works.
What? That was my next question.
No, well, I just had an event with Jed Coffin.
Oh yeah.
And I don't know if it was a grant or something, he's been invited to travel around all these small libraries in Maine and talk about his work. And he's a Maine author, for those who don't know. And he and I are going to talk about maybe collaborating on that.
Oh, how great.
So we're going to talk next week.
That's great. Congratulations.
Pretty excited.
Yeah. And Maine libraries are the best.
I know. I'm going to do something in the Winthrop Library. 2 things. They've already booked me for July 28th. So everybody put that on your calendar next summer. I love it.
It'll be in person by then.
Then there's like a Women in Maine, which they need to reach out to you too. Writers in Maine. But I want to ask you too. You only briefly like skidded over your novel in progress about Acadians, logging, whatever. Can you give me a little teaser? You've been so graciously asking me questions. I'm so nosy. I need to know.
Well, I'm not being gracious. I'm nosy, and I love your book, and I want everyone in the world to read it. So, but my book is, I'm finishing, I guess it's a 3rd draft. I don't know. It's called The Change, and it's about a woman who grew up, who is of Acadian heritage, Her last name is Gautreaux, and but you know, her mother married a Scots-Irish, so her last name's actually Calloway, but she comes from the Gautreaux. And part of it is set at her grandfather's camp, hunting and fishing camp up in the unincorporated woods. But she became a climate scientist. So she's a climate scientist who's going through menopause, whose mother just died, who comes home to Maine for the first time in 10 years. She's really left. And the novel gets into why. And the book is about sort of from the time she gets on the plane to come home from DC to what happens in Maine and I've just figured out the ending yesterday. And
oh my God.
Tell you what it is, but it's
no.
The title to me says just about everything there is to say about it's about change on every single level.
Oh, I cannot. What? Go ahead. This is so exciting.
I can't wait to finish it. Thank you for asking and being excited about it. It's sort of, I mean, I've been also obsessed with environmental stuff. Another point of connection with your book that really hit me. In the solar plexus, throughout the entire book, everything you write has just sort of, you know, it's so urgent and real and present. But I've always been obsessed sort of with climate change and what's going to happen, and it's pained and it's given me this existential sort of fury that we haven't addressed it. As collectively, there hasn't been the will to address it because nothing has, quote unquote, happened yet.
Well, that's the thing, right? That's the problem with climate change is, and what I'm trying to do in this book too, is that these are stories that happen over a long period of time. They're attritional and they're not like spectacular like the wildfires are, which I'm not happy that the wildfires happened, but at least people are like, okay, that might be real now, you know? It's really hard to tell those stories, or to get those stories, not hard to tell, but hard to get people to see them as newsy, you know?
Newsy and also personal. It's hard for...
Personal, urgent too, right?
Yeah, sort of like, well, you know, the weather's beautiful here today and I have plenty to eat and I just went swimming and, you know, it's sort of, but you know, Silent Spring came out in 1962. That's the year I was born. So my entire life I've been aware of an environmental crisis. And I remember there was in the 70s, I don't know if it was here in Maine, but in Arizona where I grew up, there was this real sort of push and awareness in schools. Don't pollute, don't waste water. Well, Arizona, but
right.
Sort of, we were aware, and I feel
we were aware of that too. Yeah.
I think there was a time in the 70s, like there was a window when.
Well, sorry. I was gonna say that's when the EPA was established.
Right.
So I think that was in the news, so it filtered down to our little families, and you know, I think that's probably why.
Well, what was it like for you in Rumford? I mean, with this toxicity all around you, there was Ed Muskie.
Who wrote the Clean Air Act, Clean Water Act.
Yep.
The only thing I remember was like, shut the lights off and pick up your garbage. Don't throw garbage on the road. Yeah. But there was no larger discussion about the environment stuff, you know. I mean, it's funny, there's still people, you know, discussing my book, that are reading my book in my town, who are like, oh, it's so much cleaner than it was. Yeah. Like, that's kind of a whataboutism. It's like, well, okay, maybe it is. You don't actually know that. And if you read my book, you would realize it's not really cleaner than it was. It's just as dirty. Yeah. Maybe even dirtier with them burning dioxin and with burning tires for fuel. And dioxin, speaking of dioxin, if we all look out the window, you know what creates unmitigated dioxin is wildfires. Especially there have been a few studies that I've looked at this week. And, you know, when buildings burn, of course, there's all these materials that are being burned. They create dioxin, and it's not filtered with anything. At least our mill has like things in the smokestacks, and they treat it. And then second is wood, and third is brush, but it all creates dioxin. So basically the whole United States is under a cloud of dioxin. Yeah. No, that's panic making. But I mean, it's a little bit true. I'm exaggerating, but it's true.
It's not just a little bit true. It's like actually true. And
I don't want everybody to run out and panic. There's somebody here. I don't know if everybody can see this. I don't know, just because I don't want to run. This Maya Jackson. She says in my American literature class, it's to me privately, but I'm going to read it anyway, Maya. In my American literature class, we talk about identity and place, and I'm wondering if there's any literature from the Acadians I could bring to my class. Yes, mine. No, there's one right here. Hold on.
I'm going to write this down too, because I want to know also.
Oh yeah, you got to read this.
Okay, what?
Pelagi.
Oh, yeah, okay. Who's it by?
It's by Antonine Mallet, and she ran the Prix Goncourt for it in
Okay.
France. Oops, can you see that?
Pelagie.
Yeah, it's called The Return to Acadie.
Okay.
It's a really, I briefly reference it in my book, but I would not bring Anne of Green Gables to your class. Do not do that. Do not read Longfellow's poem, even though I got married in his church in Portland, Maine. Yes, I did.
You talk about both those works in your book.
I do.
And yeah. I greatly enjoyed your sort of take on them.
Take down, you mean?
Yeah.
Well, there's a lot of mythology built up around them.
Yeah.
I see Rachel's here. Rachel, you have some questions? Is she?
We do. We have one question. I'm encouraging people to write in some more questions if you think of them. This question is from Star. She says, you mentioned that your family was tied to the water, similar to the indigenous people. Did these cultures blend?
Do you mean if you're saying indigenous? Did I say indigenous? They actually did at some point. The Micmacs in Canada did marry Acadians and did have children with them. And I have some of that DNA, which I've done my DNA. And it was my great-grandmother who I was talking about. It was her, I think it was her great-grandmother or grandmother that was, had part Micmac blood. But I mean, that doesn't mean anything necessarily to me. I don't have that historical reach per se, but yeah, they did. And the Micmacs actually really helped the Acadians when they first came to the country in 1601. They probably wouldn't have lived if it weren't for the indigenous people, because they helped them.
And unlike the English, they didn't kill them. That's
right. They did not kill them. They lived with them. They married them. They had sex with them. They had kids with them.
And they were friends, and they all helped each other survive.
Thank you. Yes.
Kind of extraordinary. I mean, Acadia really was an Eden, from what I know about it. The descriptions I've read of Acadia.
Wow, there's like a lot of people here. And you can just make comments. Somebody says, our adult son carries on the Christmas meat pie tradition for our family. He makes it, and ours includes pork, beef, real potato, and spices. Yum. And of course, eaten with ketchup. Yes.
Yum.
The other thing we used to make was, and I've made it here and I really like it. It's just basically, I can't remember what they call it. I'm so bad, but it's basically chicken and dumplings. So it's stew, which is delicious. But this food is very like stick to your bones kind of food, not a lot of like leafy green vegetables. I mean, in Prince Edward Island, there's a lot of potatoes up there. They grow potatoes. What else can, potatoes and meat. So, I don't know. It's funny. I'm not attracted necessarily to that kind of food. I don't know why. I mean, I am sometimes, but.
What did you make for dinner last night?
Oh, so my husband and I, he helped because if he's on here, he's going to say, I made it because I had an event last night, but it was at 9. So we both started. Anyway, made, there's this thing we make. We're growing tomatoes and we have so many cherry tomatoes, and you can all make this. It's so easy. And you can even use cherry tomatoes from the store, like put dozens of them in a bowl, mix it with olive oil and put whatever herb you have, not mint maybe, but like some kind of oregano, thyme, and we use rosemary. We had a lot of rosemary, dried rosemary, even in a big bag. Rosemary, and then sliced garlic, just tons of it, as much as you can stand. And salt and pepper. I used Urfa pepper, which is this black kind of chocolatey tasting pepper. Anyway, you roast that in the oven. You don't cut the cherry tomatoes. Leave them whole, because then they cook down without bursting and flattening and then like blackening, right? So you just cook them whole. And as soon as they get all dark and soft, take them out and then what you have waiting for you is whole yogurt, organic, preferably thick Greek style yogurt. And we mix it with minced or whatever, mushed garlic and salt. And then you put that on a platter and then you sprinkle the tomatoes over it. I cannot tell you how delicious it is.
Sounds so good.
So we had that, and my husband made flatbread. It's just really easy. It's just flour and water, and then he throws it on the grill. And then, so we just scooped that up. I did eat bread last night. I don't care. It was so good. And then with Maine grains, it's this flour we get from Maine. And then made this pork roast with onions, sherry vinegar, Pedro Jimenez sherry, and raisins. So you just like sear the pork, take it out, put the onions and the raisins in, let it cook down, put in the sherry bits, the sherry vinegar and the sherry, put the pork back in, cover it, cook it for like 2 hours. It's delicious. I'm like really hungry right now. I just went running before this, so I'm like, what did you make for dinner last night?
I made venison sausages because our
What?
Our tenant is a hunter and a butcher, and he makes amazing. So I had venison sausages, and then I got a beautiful green cabbage from our CSA.
Oh.
So I made a braised cabbage with caraway seeds and apple cider vinegar and garlic and mustard.
That's one of my favorite things to eat. I could eat an entire cabbage.
And mashed potatoes.
Oh.
And so speaking of potatoes, real mashed potatoes.
Yeah.
So mashed potatoes, braised cabbage, and sausages. That's what we had.
With the juice going into the potatoes a little bit.
Yeah.
Yum.
So good. And we put tons of mustard on the sausages, and we just moaned with pleasure as we ate.
What do you put in your I got a sausage making book, and I have yet to tackle that just because I've been experimenting with like Korean food and some Japanese stuff. So I don't know. No, I'm not good. I can't say anything yet.
Have you made some? I assume you have.
No. Just very nascent, very nascent. I'm really into Spanish, Moorish food the most, Turkish food, Lebanese. I make a lot of that stuff. In fact, I think when I come to Maine in the beginning of October to be on News Center, everybody, I'm gonna make, we're staying up at the Grey Havens Inn in Georgetown. I'm gonna make a giant paella on the beach, and you're all invited.
I wish we could invite you all over for lunch right now. We would cook you all some. I just made French toast with applesauce and maple syrup. And that's
delicious. Yeah. I'm actually sending everybody, I'm not really inviting you to the beach, but I am putting my email in the chat in case anybody has any questions, or if you're from the River Valley, Rumford in Mexico, and you want to be involved in my Cancer Yearbook, I would love to hear from you on that too. If you're still.
Do you have a new book in mind that you're going to write, or idling? Not idling. Obviously, you're not idling. You have an event every single night.
I have an event every single night. I have a lot of essays I'm working on up here. I don't know yet. I'm thinking about a novel though.
Oh, good. Will it be set in a lumber camp by any chance?
No, I will not copy you. It's not going to be anywhere in Maine. No.
You can't have too many lumber camp novels, in my opinion. There aren't enough.
It's true. I mean, Monica Wood wrote about my hometown, and it was so funny when her book came out. I just started writing about it, and I was like, "Are you kidding me?" Like, she grew up down the street. I can't write about a book about this town. She did it, but ours is very different.
I know you guys are both going to be in conversation at the Down East Literary Festival.
Yes.
I can't wait to hear you.
Yeah, that'll be fun.
We'll have a lot to talk about, I'm sure.
We will. Anybody else have any questions, Rachel?
Yeah, we have 4 more minutes, but I'll just start to say goodbye. And if anything pops up, I'll ask you. But I just wanted to thank you both so much for this delicious and interesting conversation.
Thank you,
and it's just been a pleasure. And I know we have such a good group, and I'm sure everyone really enjoyed it. So thank you so much. And Kerri, what is the date of your WCSH talk, just so people can get it in their calendars?
Oh, supposedly October 5th, unless it rains, because it's going to be out. We have to do it outside because of.
Oh,
COVID.
right.
Yeah. So October 5th, I'm going to be doing that.
Okay. Well, we'll all keep an eye out for it. And
those of you who have bought and read this book, do so. Sorry, Rachel, I just had to interrupt.
That's good, Kate. And for everyone that hasn't bought it, there are links to Longfellow and print in the chat. You can even, if you don't get the link, you can just pick up the phone and call them both. They're really user-friendly, and just pick it up on curbside pickup. So
yes, help Milltown be, last week it was a bestseller in Maine, #1, nonfiction. Yeah, in Maine, of course. I think independent in New England too was like #12. So keep that up, everybody. Not for me, but for the people that the book's about, I think. Yeah. Really, I just feel very strongly about that. So thank you both. I just want to keep going, but I'm going to go eat now.
Yeah, we're all hungry. All right, I guess with that, we'll say goodbye. Thanks again, and see you all soon.
Kate, see you in email.
Bye, Kerri. Bye, Rachel. Bye.
Bye. Thank you guys so much for your time. Bye. Sad to leave.